Hello everyone. Before we get started, I want you guys to look at the image that's on the screen and I want you to tell me what you see. I'm going to give you a couple of seconds and then we're going to discuss it. Okay, so most of you have had a chance to look at the image now, and I think most of you probably came to the conclusion that it's either a rabbit or it could be a duck depending on how you look at it. And that's the question that you need to ask yourself. What influenced you to decide to go one way or the other? There are factors that contribute to what you decide or to what you perceive to be. It's not necessarily that is the reality, but based on what you know from your background knowledge, which could be one of the factors, or experience with something else that's similar. So you come to the conclusion that it's either one or the other. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about perception and stereotypes. We're going to also look into the factors that can contribute to this, to stereotypes and to perceptions. We'll also we'll do a deep dive into cultural encapsulation and how that can impact as well on our perception and our stereotypes of different people and different groups. But more importantly, we're going to also look at strategies of of what we can do to dispel some of those stereotypes that we're talking about. So before we get into any of that, I think it's important that you first understand a lot of the vocabulary, and then we'll move through the rest of the training from there. So let's start with what's up on the screen first. We're looking at perception. And perception is basically how you see something, kind of based on your senses. When we're talking about senses, we're talking about sight, smell, sound, that type of thing, which people look at. And so even though it may look totally different, just people who are looking at the same picture, same piece of art, and they interpret it completely differently. Why? Because of their background knowledge, because of their own personal experiences. So that all ties into helping you to determine or figure out what it is that you're looking at. Okay, like for example, for me, I remember before I knew what yucca was, I thought, my goodness, what is this thing? It's like a big root plant. What are you supposed to do with it? How do you use it? It looked crazy to me. But then once I figured out what it was, because I love to cook anyway, and I learned how to actually prepare it, it's actually very good. Most people use it in the Caribbean and South America. It sort of has the consistency of, I said, potato. Very, very tasty. But looking at it on the surface, as you can see in that small image that I have there, just like tree roots, tree stumps to me. I just couldn't understand it. But that was because of my lack of knowledge, my lack of experience, and my lack of exposure to it, basically. And so the same thing happens when people try to determine or decide what one cultural group is like, what one race is like. All these factors go into play. And unfortunately, we come kind of shortchanged because we don't really know, we don't have all of the facts. So that's how these things can, and then somebody's gonna be there to fill that vacuum. And who usually fills the vacuum? It could be media, it could be other people. There's a number of things that we'll go through a little bit later. Then of course there's prejudice, which is something that's already preconceived idea of, you know, what something is or how someone is, uses a negative attitude before the facts are even known about anything. People jump to these conclusions. Again, it's sort of tying in also with stereotypes if you put together. And then another thing that's of interest and that ties into both things, perception and stereotypes, is cultural encapsulation. I said, what is that? Well, cultural encapsulation is really, you've only been exposed to your own culture. You really haven't had too much access to anything else. It's almost like you're in a cultural bubble. So that's how your world is informed. It's informed strictly by your culture. So it's very limited, and so it's just important to, expose yourself to different cultures, different people, and you can do it in an effective, safe way. Okay? So these are the vocabulary words that will be used interchangeably, but I think it's very important that you know what they are so that when they're being used, you're not lost or it doesn't, interfere with the training that's going to be going on today. All right, so let's get started. And one of the things that I'm going to do today, we're going to do an activity. And this activity is actually going to reinforce what I just discussed with you, which is perceptions, stereotypes, the factors that play into it. And so what you have before, you've already been given a packet with images on them, and also a piece of sheet there for you to take notes. And what I want you to do is I want you to look at the images, just as activity says, right? What do you see? You're going to write it down. And why do you think you see it? What do you think has influenced you to see it the way that you see it? Why do you see it that way? And just be honest. Okay, I'm going to put you guys into groups. Then we're going to come back and have a Q&A. Okay, so as you can see, I have the images up here, and then I'm going to display right below the image what they are. So the first one that we're looking at is a little boy. He's in a neighborhood. Look at the neighborhood's kind of run down, right? And then the other images of that building with a clock on it. Okay, so let's see what they actually are about and where they are. So the first one with the tall buildings, that's Great Britain, which most people probably could have figured that one out because of the clock with Big Ben there and everything like that. But the second image, though, I think people are going to be a little surprised because it's also Great Britain, and it's in one of the rundown areas. Here in the States, we would call it one of the ghetto areas, and probably be surprised by some, unless of course you live there and you understand that there are always two sides to every story. So image-wise, you'll constantly be showing the positive, but sometimes they don't show the negative. So in your mind, because based on what you see, what you know, again, we're talking about the senses, that is what you're going to base your perception on and what your conclusions will come from. Okay, next, looking at a tropical island, obviously, it's one. Another city, like it's on the water, and some type of a market. So let's see what they are. Well, the one where you see the animals, okay, so that's a safari in Kenya. Most people probably figured that. Now the one below is a market in the Ivory Coast. It's in West Africa. Again, it's another part of Africa. And at the top, Senegal, West Africa. Okay, which is beautiful. I actually been to Senegal. Clear blue water, clear blue skies. It's absolutely gorgeous. You would never think so because it's really never advertised as such. It's a great vacation spot. And the Ivory Coast reminded me of a little mini Manhattan. It's another place that I traveled to. And again, it's never shown. So most people really, when they think of Africa, they usually think of the villages or safaris. But Africa actually has a lot of developed nations within it. So again, so they can kind of get rid of some of the stereotypes that are out there about that particular part of the world. And here, these other images, what do we have? Well, we have a village in Thailand, and we have the city of Bangkok, which is also in Thailand. So as you can see, there's extremes in every part of the world. In the United States, we have built-up cities, we have rural areas, we have urban areas, so-called ghetto areas. We have a little bit of everything. So do most countries around the world. And then finally, the last one is a mall in Kenya. Now, before we were looking at the safari in Kenya, but do you ever think of Kenya and think of a mall? Probably not, unless you've been, exposed to it. You travel a bit, so you have a little bit more insight. But with all these things, you can see how certain factors are going to influence what you think, how you see things, and of course, stereotypes. Okay, so let's go to a Q&A now and see if we can answer some of those questions, like what informed your perception? Do you think similar factors can contribute to stereotypes about others? And what can be done to help dispel them? And so let's look at some of those things. So some of the factors that contribute to perception would be distorted information, limited personal experience, outside sources, media, newspaper, beliefs, and other interpretations from other people. Someone else telling you that this group is that way or this culture is that way, and you actually might believe it. But we have to also look at what can we do to dispel some of those rumors. And so some of the things we can do to dispel some of those rumors is to socializing with other cultural groups, researching, just doing a little bit of background information on certain cultures of nature, traveling. So there are a lot of different things that you can do to expose yourself to different cultural events, different ethnicities that will help you to navigate a little bit better in this diverse world that we're living in, and to have a better understanding and awareness of what's out there and how to navigate it effectively. Thank you. And next is the quick review. What is a stereotype? 3 outside factors that can influence, and list 3 strategies that can help dispel what is prejudice. And that is the end of our segment. Thank you.